Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. This is Whitney Will from Starhearth Astrology, and I'm here for your weekly astrology forecast for the week of March 11th through the 17th. Now, this week is not super busy in terms of aspects that perfect this week, but it is a kind of undertow pull still into eclipse season, into our next Mercury retrograde cycle, and really the larger story arcs of the spring. Things are starting to heat up and quicken up around here, and I'm sure you can feel it in your life. So here are the details. We're going to start with talking about Mercury's upcoming retrograde because last weekend, on Saturday night, Mercury entered Aries. Now, normally Mercury spends about 2.5 to 3.5 weeks in a sign. But this spring, Mercury is going to be in Aries from March 8th or 9th, depending on your time zone, until May 15th. So over 2 months in Aries. And that's because there's a retrograde in the middle, and the retrograde spends its entire time in Aries. Now, Aries is also getting lit up by a total solar eclipse. So the Aries part of your chart is really the focus, and it would make sense for Mercury, our thinker, our speaker, to enter into that sign and really start paying attention to what is going on there in your life. Now, this is going to have a bigger impact if you have significant Gemini and Virgo placements that are ruled by the planet Mercury, or if you are in a Gemini or Virgo profected year, making Mercury your Lord of the year, because Mercury transits will be more significant during those years. So, Mercury in Aries, right? Mercury is what we think about, how we speak, how we communicate, the ideas that are pervading our minds. And Mercury in Aries really wants to do something about it. There's an impulse to action that is characteristic of Aries. And with Mercury, that becomes part of our cerebral and social functioning. Is like, okay, this person said something that pissed me off. Before I sit back and think about it, I'm going to say something, right? I am really fired up about this cause. I need to make something happen about this. So there's this kind of pressure that is pent up. And I think it comes from, you know, having a lot of feelings of helplessness around what's going on in the world right now, around watching tragedy and atrocity, not being able to afford groceries, right? This kind of feeling of impending climate doom, the desperation of all of the elections this year, right? In Pisces, we really kind of held that in our bodies. And Mercury moving from Pisces, where it's not only in its detriment, but also its fall, where it's with Saturn, that kind of heaviness, and Neptune, that kind of confusion, into the sign of Aries is like getting wrung out and wants to take action. And I think that that is something to really lean into, right? Even though we have a retrograde, even though we know we'll be retracing our steps and have to correct things and have to fix things, this Mercury wants to do stuff. And I think if you try and hold it back and go slow, it's just going to be really frustrating. Like, I kind of think the way to navigate this Mercury retrograde is like be kind of a crazy person in terms of the things that you're saying, the boldness that you're taking, right? This is kind of like, this is a Mercury retrograde, and Aries is like, you only have one life to live. Just try things. Like, and then when they don't work, try something else. But don't sit there and get too bogged down in the reflection, when what you really need to do is just start trying stuff and taking action. I have a little helpful visual here for organizing some of this information, so that you can kind of see. Mercury conjoins the North Node right as it enters the pre-shadow of the retrograde. So Mercury entered Aries on March 8th or 9th. It enters the pre-shadow of the retrograde on the 18th, which is the beginning of next week. But right, we're building up to this. So it's going to enter the pre-shadow and the same day that it conjoins the North Node. The North Node makes things a lot bigger. It tries to bring things down into the world. It wants things embodied. So this is kind of a day for potentially explosive or impulsive communication that's really going to color the story arc of the retrograde. So the stuff that gets said with Mercury on the North Node is that selfish, direct stuff that needs to get out of your body, right? Now, you can do it in communicating in a straightforward way. You can also write it out without translation, and then we'll work backwards from there, right? You don't have to say it directly to the person, but you can. This is kind of, it's going to be messy. Like one of my favorite astrologers says, like the first rule of a knife fight is that you're going to get cut. And that's a really good kind of idea for heading into Aries and heading into Aries season is that, like we may have a Libran bias and think that awkwardness is the worst thing that could ever happen in the world. Aries doesn't care. Aries is not sitting still enough, long enough to worry about people feeling awkward. This is kind of like, okay, we're just going to try it in all of its rawness, and we're going to keep trying until we get where we need to go, but we're not going to sit in our anxiety and worry that we're going to make someone feel awkward. That's really not the way to get through this. Now, having said that, Aries is ruled by Mars. We are going to have Mars. We've got Mars at the end of Aquarius right now. Mars is going to enter Pisces. And so Mars is going to have to contend with Saturn and Neptune. And so Mars, as the director of Mercury and Aries, is going to be feeling the weight and the heaviness and the doom and the oppression and the helplessness of Saturn and Pisces, and then the confusion, possible delulu of Neptune. So we're going to be really confused, right? And it's going to be fine, ultimately, but it's going to be messy while it's happening. And then at the very, very end of April, Mars is going to enter Aries and kind of like do the things that actually need to get done. Our doer is finally going to be in that place. So this is just a time where it's going to be hard to plan. You're going to have to make decisions without knowing all of the information. You're going to have to backtrack on things and redo things. And the sooner you can just come at that with acceptance rather than a sense of panic, the easier it is going to be on your mercurial nervous system. Because this is big deal times right now. And nobody has a script for what this is going to look like. So we're just going to do our best. Okay. None of it is going to be the end of the world because guess what? The world's not going to end. So there's going to be some pinchy moments. Mercury is going to station retrograde on April 1st, which is kind of this like April Fool's joke in itself of like whatever you thought was happening, it's probably not going to happen. We're going to have to redesign the whole thing starting April 1st. So we're just going to be patient with that and whatever that is going to look like, right? We just trust that we'll get where we need to go, even though things are going to be kind of frustrated. A week later, we have a total solar eclipse. It's at 19 degrees of Aries. Mercury is going to be at 24 degrees of Aries. So really close, not as close as Chiron that is conjunct the eclipse to the degree and the arc minute. So a really, really potent Chiron eclipse about wounding the heels, healing the wounds to the authentic self, which sometimes looks like wounding the heels. Right? In graduate school, a professor said, our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think that this is big Aries medicine, right? In the places where you are too comfortable and not being authentic and not being true to yourself and not expressing your spontaneous, authentic, juicy self and love and for life and the power of being alive, that will wound the heels. And yeah, and giving voice to that self will heal the wounds. Okay. 3 days after that, we have the Cazimi, which is the midpoint in our retrograde cycle. It's the point where Mercury gets cleansed in the heart of the sun. If you remember, the sun is exalted in Aries. And so Mercury is not only getting renewed by the sun, but getting cleansed in an exalted sun that has just been eclipsed, that has just had a moment of coming back to itself, of having this deep refresher of like, okay, what does it look like to be myself in this context? And Mercury is there to be like, okay, what do we do about it? Again, right? This is kind of the question of Mercury and Aries. What do we do about it? Now, this is tricky. You're not actually going to be able to do it, for one, because Mercury is still retrograde, but for two, because Mars, the ruler of Mercury and Aries, is approaching a conjunction with Saturn that will go exact on April 13th. And they are going to be conjoining in the sign of Pisces. And this is Mars feeling like no matter what it does, it's still treading water. And the treading water is a very intentional choice of words because we are in Pisces with the kind of weighted, the like water weights of Saturn, right? This is go deep, right? The solution to Mars in Pisces and to this is the depth. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Um, at the very end of April, Mercury will station direct on April 27th. And finally, on April 30th, Mars will enter Aries. And these two things, right, coincidence or whatever, right? Mercury is going to stop in the sky and almost wait for its ruler to enter the sign. And now, finally, all of these things that Mercury has been trying to do, getting very confused directives from Mars, it can do, and they are going to move through Aries together. Mars will be in Aries through the end of May. So, right, we've kind of got all of May to deal with that. Mercury is going to leave the post shadow of the retrograde on the 13th, which means we kind of wrapped it up. We got a handle on it. We said what we needed to say. We apologized. We didn't apologize. We rewrote the things, ready to go. On May 15th, Mercury enters Taurus for kind of a rest and a kind of like slow the roll, turn down the volume, recover a little bit, like eat all of those calories that you were metabolizing too fast while Mercury was in Aries, and let's do some nervous system recovery. So that is the story with Mercury and Aries and the retrogrades and its tie-in to the eclipses. Now, the second big deal thing that happens this week is that Venus enters Pisces. And this is a much needed balm. Venus enters her exaltation. And so part of what we do here is we make art to soothe our soul. We make art to process the grief. This is the expressive arts. We give it away for free. We do it in community. We don't worry about the product. We let it move through us. We come into a place of compassion and forgiveness, of understanding that no matter where we are drawing the lines between us and them, ultimately in the Piscean, Neptunian, God sense of time and world, we are all made of the same flesh. Our atoms come from the same stars. You cannot wound someone without wounding yourself. This pain that moves through our collective body and the trauma that moves through affects all of us, and it will for generations to come. And the healing and the grace that you give yourself affects all of us, and it will for generations to come and generations back through history. We are extraordinarily resilient in our creative response to life, and it is true in some contexts that violence wins out, and it is also true that mercy and compassion and grace are everlasting, both secular and religious, however we access those words. And Venus and Pisces can bring us some of that. She is coming to tend the grief of Saturn and Pisces. She is coming to bring connection and attraction and create community around the beautiful fantasies of Neptune. She's here for it. Venus in Pisces is grace and generosity and benevolence. Another really, really beautiful thing about Venus in Pisces is that in Pisces, with Jupiter and Taurus, they are in mutual reception in each other's signs. So very well placed. They will come into a sextile with each other, not this week, but later on. And so, right, what do we do with this? We process through harmony, through closeness, through connection. A really, really great time to do that. We're in the waxing phase of the moon this week, right after our Pisces new moon, which was potent and dreamy, right? So give yourself time to kind of get your bearings after being in such a place of depth with connection with the new moon, a place of hopefully a little bit of rest. We will pick up energy throughout this week. Yeah, and we will end the week Sunday with the sun's conjunction with Neptune. So that will be another day to kind of give into fantasy, do some escapism, visit the ocean, right? Remember that as dire as this mortal coil feels at the moment, and whatever's going on in our context, the promise of Neptune is that we will be redeemed and recycled back into our little star pieces, and that you know, whatever happens, the peace will return, and that there is balm to be had, and there is soothing to be had. Looking ahead to next week, we have the spring equinox. We have the beginning of Aries season. We have the buildup to an eclipse. It is all really quite amazing. I am so happy to be here on this journey with you. I am so loving Mercury in Aries. Like, subscribe, share this with your people. Reach out to me if you feel called to do some personal work during eclipses. I love it. We can go so deep during eclipses. I would love to see you and work with you, and help in the way that I can. Okay, everyone. Happy Venus and Pisces. Get all feisty with Mercury and Aries, and I will see you next week.